welcome you to Boswell Book Company's virtual event series. I'm Daniel Golden at Boswell. It is day 4,610 of us being in business, and while I mentioned some upcoming events, they all pale in comparison to tonight's event. Already a Boswell bestseller is Gastro Obscura, a food adventurer's guide from the folks who brought you Atlas Obscura, which was if you'll remember, we've already had two wonderful in-person events with Dylan Thuras, and now we are bringing you even something better virtually. We are so honored to be hosting Cecily Wong, the co-author of Atlas Obscura. She's also the author of the novel Diamond Head, which was the recipient of an Elle Reader's Prize, and she is also the author of the forthcoming novel Kaleidoscope, which I immediately thought I have to read that right now, but I can't because I'm running an event. And Dylan Thuras comes back to Boswell. He is the co-founder and creative director of Atlas Obscura and also the co-author of the Atlas Obscura Explorer's Guide for the World's Most Adventurous Kid. We have a special guest star who is going to be doing the conversation after our presentation, but I've been told maybe we want to keep that a surprise. So I'm very excited to be having him, but I can't say who it is yet. Thank you both. Thank you, Cecily Wong. Thank you, Dylan Thuras. What an honor to have you both. Thank you for coming to Boswell.
Thank you, Daniel. What a welcome. Yes.
Well, I've had such a blast at all of the events we've done with you, Daniel, and with Boswell's. And I'm glad to be back in this virtual form. I have to start by explaining something. So this morning I woke up and my computer would only open this far before it got like covered in pink bars of doom. So I have to do everything on my computer with it only open this much. So it's stacked on a bunch of books and tipped upwards, which is why you can see the bottom of the screen so close to the camera. That's weird. I'm peeking in a tiny entrance here. It's not normal, but it is how I'm going to be doing this because I did not have time to get a different computer. So I think it's going to work. You're just going to see my hands oddly close to the screen. Pay attention to Cecily. To start, I think we are going to take you all on a little trip around the world through Gastro Obscura and around the world and through some of our own food history and why we wanted to make this book and what it's about and all of that. Cecily, anything to add before we get going?
No, let's take our trip around the world.
All right, let's hit
with
it.
your tiny screen.
My tiny screen and my enormous hand. It's like I live in a weird little box. All right, hang on. Let me share my screen. Okay. Yeah. Uh-huh.
It adds some intrigue.
It's an unusual view. It's like I'm peeking through a tiny, very what is that movie? God damn it.
I don't think I can help you with this one.
You know, with the floors and the guy, John Malkovich. That's the one, meaning John Malkovich. Okay, hello. So this is Gastro Obscura. Let's begin. So I grew up not far from you all out there near Boswell's. I grew up as a kid eating this. This is a jar, you might recognize it, some of you. It's a jar filled with vinegar, sugar, onions, dill, and a bunch of cut up fish. And it's truly, absolutely delicious. I loved it as a kid. I love it now. I also grew up in a place where every summer my family would pack up the car and we would go watch people's faces get carved in 90-pound blocks of butter. And this is just a normal thing that normal people did. And you know this, Wisconsin, you know these are normal things that normal people do. I think you probably already know, but do you guys have guesses about where I grew up? This is a little bit of an unfair one because of the shared heritage here. Anyone guess? Yes. Julia, you are absolutely right. Minneapolis, even more specific and also correct. Yeah, so I grew up in Minnesota. I grew up in Minneapolis. My family, it has Scandinavian heritage, like a lot of people in the Midwest. And my family emigrated here, and they brought with them these classic Scandinavian dishes like pickled herring, lefse, lutefisk, and also, this area, the Midwest, Wisconsin, Minnesota, enormous dairy producers. And so places like the Minnesota State Fair and others would show off this abundant dairy through their enormous butter sculptures. Meanwhile, elsewhere
in the world, I grew up eating a lot of this. This is called a spam musubi. It is spam with rice. It's wrapped in a piece of seaweed. Where I'm from, you can buy these anywhere, gas stations, convenience stores. They are essentially sandwiches. I also grew up eating a lot of this, which was pretty much the only salad served in my house. Macaroni salad. It is macaroni with a very thick mayo dressing. And Deborah has already guessed where I am from. It is Hawaii. Well done, Deborah.
These
Thank
people
you.
are on it.
Yes.
Deborah, Annie, Carol, David, these people are all over it.
Oh my god. Okay. Well, good crowd. I'm from Hawaii. My family is from Hawaii. All four of my grandparents lived there. They came over from China in the early 1900s. My parents lived there for most of their life, and I was born there, but I did not grow up in Hawaii. I grew up here in Oregon, in the land of pickles. And because I grew up in Oregon, I also had the opportunity, like Dylan, to take some very dairy heavy vacations. We used to go to the Tillamook Cheese Factory, which you can see here is this magical place where you stand above this factory where people move huge hunks of cheese around. And then you eat ice cream at the end. You eat a lot of cheese. It's really delicious and pretty good. I recommend this.
Yeah, Cecily and I bonded over our dairy-oriented childhoods, and over actually our extremely loose sense of what salads are, because obviously Cecily has the macaroni salad, and as you may already know, we have things like the cookie salad, which is a Keebler fudge strip cookies and buttermilk and pudding with whipped cream topping, and then possibly some light fruit added after all of that. And it's a whole enormous category, dessert salads, which can be found across the Midwest in churches, wherever you go. Hello, this is us. I am Dylan Thuras.
That is us. I am Cecily Wong. This is us looking our best as authors.
Very authorial. Yeah, and the reason we wanted to start off with our own food backgrounds is, in two examples, two from me, two from Cecily, you were able to place us pretty quickly in the world. Food ties all of us to place, to heritage, to history. Even when we don't realize it's happening, it's still making those connections. And in the same way that food can tell you where Cecily and I are from, it can also bring you around the world without ever leaving your kitchen. It can kind of go both ways. And this is really what we wanted to do with Gastro Obscura.
It is. So this is it. This is the book. It is 500 entries that take you around the world. But it's not just foods. We cover endangered traditions and forgotten histories and incredible eating experiences and just kind of edible wonder of every variety. And one of the best things about this book is that as often as we can, we tell you exactly how and where you can eat these things yourself.
Yeah, so if you attended either of the other events, you'll know that this all sort of started originally over 10 years ago when my co-founder Josh and I started this website called Atlas Obscura, which is basically an art project to create a map of hidden wonders all over the world and foster this sense of wonder and a sense of community for people who wanted to travel differently and find interesting, unusual places to visit. And over the years, we turned that into a book project, which we published in 2016. And, it was all about place. So Atlas Obscura included places like this, the gates of hell in Turkmenistan, giant burning hole in the middle of the desert, It's looks like it's a natural phenomenon. It's not. It's an industrial accident that's been on fire for over 50 years. Places like this, you probably have already seen these if you came to one of those other talks. This is the Quechua, the last Incan bridge, woven entirely out of grass, and every year cut down and remade and made in the exact same way it was 500 years ago during the Incan Empire. It's a little unbroken piece of Incan infrastructure. But one of the big ideas behind Atlas Obscura was this idea that you didn't need to go to Turkmenistan or Peru to find incredible places, that you could go around the corner. You could go somewhere really close. This is one of my local wonders in my own backyard. This is in New York City, in Flushing, Queens. It's called the Ganesh Temple. And it's an incredibly beautiful piece of architecture. It's worth going to look at just for the incredible scale of this Hindu temple in Queens. But what we found is that sense of wonder and surprise was even closer in a way than just around the corner. One day we basically looked in front of us and found that sense of wonder right there.
Yes, we did. This is right underneath the Ganesh Temple. There's a basement canteen, and it serves these South Indian dosas, almost exclusively South Indian dosas, and they are so delicious. But more than that, what we found is that by eating in this canteen, it kind of helps to piece together a story about where you are, kind of about the temple above you and the people you're eating with, the neighborhood that you're in. And you got this really fascinating story about immigration and cultural adaptation and preservation. And that was kind of one of the more beautiful things that we found about food, is that by paying attention, it can tell you a little story about exactly where you're sitting.
Yeah. So about 4 years ago, we started this project, Gastro Obscura, and it was to take some of the same ideas from Atlas Obscura and apply it to the world of food and drink. And as we did this work, and we asked our users, our travelers, to tell us about an incredible dish, ingredient, restaurant that they knew about, one thing that became clear like right away was just how much we're connected around the world by our food traditions. Our own personal food traditions connect us to many different places. So take, for example, my beloved pickled herring. There's a version of this almost everywhere in the world. In Japan, you can find shimesaba, which is a piece of mackerel cured in rice wine vinegar and then eaten as sushi. In South and Central America, you can find a variation on pescado and escabeche, or it's a cousin of ceviche. You can find this dish really in many places all over the world. It's also a pickled fish dish. It's in Latin America, it's in Spain, it's in the Philippines, and in Jamaica, where it's made spicy with Scotch bonnet peppers. And you can find the same thing, a pickled fish in South Africa. It's a kind of universal language in food. This is the Cape Malay pickled fish, which is said to have originated with Malaysian fishermen who were pickling it, obviously to preserve the fish as long as possible, but since has become a really popular Easter dish. And we found that, as we looked at food in this kind of broad lens, looking for connection, looking for interesting parallels, this act of pickling, but also acts of fermenting, of brewing, of smoking, of drying, in the case of lutefisk, dousing a fish in drying it, then dousing it in lye so that it becomes at one point deadly to eat, then rinsing it out. It's all this kind of act of magical transmutation. And for so much of history, food was about finding these ingenious ways to preserve whatever calories were available to you. And, that's eggs of every variety, fat, blood, insects, worms, whatever you could find, and then coming up with ways of keeping those things edible for as long as possible. And all of this was a bit of human brilliance. And sometimes food was devised just to keep people alive, but often in that process, something really delicious and incredible was created.
True. For example, Spam, my childhood delight. This is a canned meat, at its heart. This is just a very smart preservation technique. So it makes sense that Spam came to Hawaii with World War II to feed the soldiers on an island with kind of limited resources, limited protein for soldiers. But since then, Spam has essentially become Hawaiian culture. Hawaiians have accepted Spam into every facet of their cuisine. Hawaiians eat the most Spam per capita, that more than anyone in the world. It's like 7 million cans of Spam, which is like 7 cans of Spam per person. And that's a lot, because that's including everyone. That's including babies. So many cans of Spam. And that is on full display at this beautiful event called the Spam Jam that takes place every year on Oahu, where my family's from. It's this massive Spam party. Essentially 35,000 people come to Hawaii to attend this party just to eat tons of Spam in insane forms: Spam fries, Spam pastries, macadamia nuts, and powdered Spam. It is a amazing celebration. I've had the pleasure of doing this, and if you care for Spam at all, you should get yourself to the Spam Jam.
And you see this kind of thing again, a similar sort of story in South Korea with the dish called budae. And this is another story where during the Korean War, American soldiers show up in mass to Korea. Korean stores were, food was short. This was a real time of deprivation. And so, basically this black market emerged for soldiers' rations. And anything that could be scavenged from the garbage or traded for was. And so this meant what Koreans were finding was things like canned beans, cheese, hot dogs, and of course, Spam, all of which ended up ultimately in a pot sharing space with things like kimchi, vegetables, chili paste, instant noodles, more traditional Korean ingredients. And ultimately, this incredible stew, budae, which really came out of a period of deprivation, was created. And now you can find it, all around the world, wherever there's a kind of Korean diaspora or a Korean restaurant. And it's just an example of the way that ingredients can be kind of absorbed and remade in new ways. Even, back home, Spam is found. Obviously, it was invented in Minnesota. And the thing that I found interesting is things that I thought of being particularly quintessentially Midwestern, something like butter sculpture. Like, how much more Midwestern could you get? Turns out have interesting parallels around the world. So across the world, you find this. This is Tibetan butter sculpture, which goes back hundreds of years. It's made out of yak butter. And in this case, they use mineral pigments to color the butter and make these really unbelievable, elaborate, kind of puts the state fair to shame, frankly. Really, suddenly I'm like, oh, we're like amateur hour. This is this incredible example of a monastic food custom. And, at the end of this festival where a lot of these butter sculptures are made, they're fed back to the livestock in this nice kind of Buddhist cyclical form. Although I will say that when they give at the end of the state fair, they give the butter heads back to the contestants of Princess K of the Milky Way, and they are often also then like served up in big pancake breakfast, like charity breakfast, and sliced into butter pats. So in a way, everyone ends up eating the butter. But anyway, so this was an example of one of these interesting parallels. And also another theme that we saw emerge throughout the book. This is a beautiful example of monastic foods. Across the world, we found that the foods of monks and nuns and at temples all over the world, beautiful specific food traditions are being carried on. And besides that, very often, these monastic traditions will get you extremely and profoundly wasted.
Wasted. Yes. Example A, this is Lindisfarne Island. It is also known as Holy Island because it was once home to a medieval order of monks who used to make some extremely delicious mead. Mead itself is actually, it's historically a holy beverage. The ancient Greeks used to call it the nectar of the gods. they're still making this mead on this island today. It is sweet, it is velvety. It will get you extremely drunk, especially if you miss one of the tides going in and out. This is a tidal island, so you can only cross over once every 12 hours, which means if you forget, you're just stuck drinking mead for 12 hours, which there are worse fates.
There are worse things, but there are also better things. Here in the French Alps, you will find another group of monks. You will find Carthusian monks. They live up here in this beautiful landscape, making a drink you might have actually tried called chartreuse. You can find it in lots of liquor stores and in bars. And this order of monks goes way back. They go back to around 1000 AD, and they were a group of silent monks. And then after becoming a very sort of powerful order in the 1600s, the Carthusians were given this gift by the royalty, this ancient alchemical manuscript that was said to be an elixir for preserving life. And they looked at the document and they were like, this is ridiculous. It called for 130 different plants. It required distillation, infusion, maceration. It was just like a nightmare of a drink to make. They was like, why would we ever make this? But eventually someone did actually give it a try. They probably changed the recipe, almost certainly. But in 1737, they finally made the first version of chartreuse. And they brought this potent herbal tonic around to the villages by mule. And the drink that they were handing out at that time was 69% alcohol. So when we say they go hard, they go hard. Eventually they realized that maybe this was a little too hard. You can still get the original variety of chartreuse. You buy it in these tiny bottles in this little like paper wrapper. But you can get also what they eventually settled on, and you find in most places, just green chartreuse. It's still 55% alcohol, but I personally love it. It's this like very herbaceous liqueur. It's got like that weird kind of medicinal taste. I really like that in drinks. And this order is still the only people who make chartreuse. No one else makes it. In fact, only 2 monks know how to make this drink. They pass it from generation to generation. They brew these enormous vats of it. Right now, it's Dom Benoit and Brother Jean-Jacques. Those are the two. And they put these in these casks in the world's longest liquor cellar. So more monks getting you drunk.
Green chartreuse is delicious. Plus, it prolongs life. So
yeah,
we should all drink more of it.
Yeah.
So for a slightly calming religious visit, I suppose, you could head to China's holy Mount Hua. It begins not so calm. It begins with this, which is called the plank walk, because of the planks that you see that are mounted into the mountain face, and you have to kind of shimmy along them, use these chains as your guide, hope that you don't fall. This has been called by many people the most dangerous hike in the world, mainly because of this plank walk. But this hike has been attracting pilgrims for centuries because of what's at the top, which is this absolutely incredible view. You make it 7,000 feet in the air, and there's a small Taoist temple at the top. And inside that Taoist temple is a tea house where you can have an incredibly hard won cup of tea, probably the most hard won cup of tea you've ever had in your life, and the most incredible view while you enjoy that tea.
Yeah, for another kind of a more wholesome monastic food, you could go to India, to the Golden Temple. This is a very famous Sikh temple. And one of the things they practice is a tradition called langar, which everyone eats for free at this temple. It doesn't matter caste, creed, religion, none of it matters. If you show up, they will serve you a meal, which means that they serve between 75,000 and on special occasions, 100,000 meals a day. It means that this whole temple is filled with entire rooms dedicated to nothing else but producing the food, the pretty simple food that they serve. So in one room, Dozens of volunteers sit in circles, chopping vegetables for the vegetarian stew. In another room, a whole team cooks the stew in these giant wood-fired vats with what are basically oars. They're enormous wooden spoons, but you might as well call them oars. And there's another room where they make dal, this lentil curry, this important lentil curry, and it requires basically a fire hose and 28,000 pounds of lentils every single day. It's making meals on a scale that very few other places can even compare with.
Incredible. This is a church in Ethiopia. When it was first built in the 5th century, a swarm of bees came and settled inside. And actually, since then, the same colony of bees has taken up residence and has been tended to by a continuous succession of priests. This church is one of 3 holy honey churches around the Ethiopian city of Lalibela. And this town was named after King Lalibela, and his name translates to "the bees recognize his sovereignty." And so this honey is considered extremely holy. It is dispensed by the clergy, and it's used medicinally. It treats all sorts of ailments. It's ingested for abdominal pain, digestive issues, but it's also often applied topically to treat things as serious as leprosy.
Interestingly, in the theme of this kind of rhyming and parallels, it's certainly not the only food that crosses that border between the religious and the delicious, and it's not even the only sort of mystic honey that you can find. There are other honeys out there that sort of occupy this space between food and medicine and drugs. One of the things we found in this book was like there's no clear division between any of these things. Like on one side, you have some delicious meal. On the other side, you have a poison that kills you dead. And in between is medicine, ceremonial drugs, all sorts of stuff. And it's kind of one smooth thing. And you find this example in this other honey that can be found in the hills of Turkey near the Black Sea. And so in this part of Turkey, these enormous fields of rhododendrons grow. And there's a ton of different types of rhododendrons, but a few contain something called granotoxin, which is a type of neurotoxin. And the amount in any single rhododendron is basically negligible. But once the bees collect it all and essentially distill it into honey, what you end up with is a psychedelic honey called delibal, or mad honey. And it's been in use in this region for millennia. You can actually also find it in parts of Nepal. But in this region, it's taken mostly as a folk medicine. It's used, you take just a little bit, and it's pretty bitter and usually dark colored. You add it to tea, and it's thought to relieve hypertension, diabetes, gastric pain. But if you take too much, if you take a tablespoon or more, it can start to cause some serious symptoms. So you can start to hallucinate, you can get nausea and numbness, and in extreme cases, death is possible. We know this in part because in 67 BC, the Roman Emperor Pompey sent this huge army of Roman soldiers into Turkey to defeat the then king there, King Mithridates, who was refusing to submit to the Roman emperor. He refused for a long time. It's like the 3rd time they tried to get him to submit. And in this case, this phalanx of Roman soldiers, this enormous column of Roman soldiers comes marching in, and they find scattered along the road pieces of honeycomb, just whole nice chunks of honeycomb. And they've been marching for days, whatever. And so they gorge themselves on these sweet snacks that they find along the way. And of course, shortly thereafter, they begin to hallucinate, pass out, and Mithridates' army sweeps in and wipes them out. It's one of the sort of great sacks in Roman history. And so, this idea of honey as psychedelic, as food, as a weapon of war in this case, kind of blurs all of these boundaries. And it's also not the only sort of surprising, sometimes even accidental psychedelic food. This is Salima porgy, which is a cute little fish about this big, found across the Mediterranean. And normally it's fried. It's eaten like this. It's pretty delicious, normal kind of fish dish, eaten around the French Riviera and Tunisia. But once in a while, people order this and things go slightly differently. In Arabic, this is known as the fish that makes dreams, and it's a relatively mild way of describing what this fish can induce. Certain of these fish, and it's not totally clear what's going on. Probably they're eating some kind of algae that's really causing this. That's where the sort of toxin is. But it causes these incredibly powerful hallucinations, similar to LSD. And we know this in part because there's an amazing 2006 study in the Journal of Toxicology, which examined basically the case of two guys who went out to have a fish dinner and then spent the rest of the night listening to birds talking to them and giant spiders surrounding their car. It was an extremely memorable evening for them. In fact, the Romans, to bring them back, they knew about the qualities of this fish and they purposely took it to induce hallucinations, and it's still used ceremoniously in Polynesia. So again, crossing many different boundaries.
So if the LSD fish is too hardcore, you could try miracle berries. These are just fun. They are berries that are native to West Africa. They look like cranberries. They kind of taste like bland cranberries, but they have a little bit of magic, which is that when you eat them and you coat your mouth with the juice of the berry, everything that you eat afterwards that should taste sour tastes very sweet. So if you eat a lemon, it tastes like lemonade. If you eat, I just had some sour cream after eating a miracle berry, whipped cream. It's really cool. There is a very special protein in this berry called miraculin, and it binds to your sweet taste bud receptors and it fires in sour environments. And so all sorts of things that should not taste sweet are suddenly sweet.
Yeah, and this is one of the things we were interested in, whether it's about dissolving the barrier between eating and tripping, or the way Spam transformed cuisine from Hawaii to South Korea, or the parallels between state fair butter sculptures and Tibetan monks sculpting in butter. Food has what is a truly incredible, astounding ability to make connections and recombine into new forms. This is sort of a magic that food can do that not a lot of other things can. When I was growing up, I didn't know a ton about food growing up. I didn't know very many chefs. I had heard of one chef, and it was this guy. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. So this guy, Wolfgang Puck, was like a name around, and he had this big idea, this revolutionary concept of fusion cuisine. He was combining European and Asian techniques, and that's all fine. Like you can do that, and sometimes you can come up with amazing dishes. But what I found in working on this book is that fusion is not really a style of cuisine. It is the history of food itself. It is the entire story of food is fusion cuisine. All of food is effectively fusion cuisine. Food is fusion. And you see this really wherever you go in the world. You can see examples of this.
Take this cake, for example. So this cake began its life as a German spit cake. So essentially kind of a very liquidy batter that's been brushed on a rotating hot spit so that it starts to make these layers. But then Dutch traders, they took this German recipe and they sailed with it to Indonesia looking for spices. And then in Indonesia, the locals took the cake, added spices themselves, and they changed the way they made the layers. They put the batter into a pan, they broiled it so that they could make these really beautiful designs, which gives you this cake, which kind of belongs to the Germans, to the Dutch, to the Indonesians, all in their own right.
Yeah, we found this over and over again. So this is a dish called morkocha, and in the 1860s, thousands of Koreans moved into Russia. And by the 1930s, there were nearly 2,000 Koreans in the Soviet Union, but Stalin basically declared them to be an unreliable people and forcibly pushed them into parts of Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. And part of that process was adapting to new ingredients. And out of this, morkocha emerged, which is a kind of spicy carrot, quick kimchi that's now beloved really across Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Russia. If you go into like a Russian deli, you can find morcocha, and it comes from this story of diaspora and kind of forced adaptation.
This is Brazilian sushi. Brazil is actually home to 1.5 million people of Japanese descent, which is the largest population outside of Japan. And so they have this extremely vibrant sushi culture. This is a hand roll from Brazil. It is enormous. You can't really tell the scale of this from this picture, but really big and filled with things like mangoes, like kiwis, tropical fruits that are commonly found in Brazil and not commonly found in hand rolls.
Or in Japan, if you go to Okinawa, you can find this. This is another example of GIs showing up in a place and bringing with them, in this case, a different kind of fusion cuisine, a kind of Tex-Mex form of tacos, and then asking for them and ending up with this dish, which is Okinawan taco rice. If you go into a Taco Bell in Japan, you are likely to find Okinawan taco rice.
Love that. This is from Eritrea. This is spaghetti al sugo e berbere. This is essentially local cuisine mixing with Italian occupation. You have the spaghetti and tomato sauce, but then the tomato sauce is laced with the local spice mixture. So there's chili peppers, ginger, nigella seed, fenugreek, and then the spaghetti is eaten with injera, the spongy flatbread that's eaten all over the Horn of Africa.
Even dishes that we're really familiar with come out of this. Most dishes we're familiar with come out of this tradition. So this is chicken tikka masala, which probably many people on watching this have eaten. This was basically made because drunk British people grew up eating meat in gravy. What happened is, there was an enormous diaspora from Pakistan and India to the British Isles, and a lot of restaurants were opened. And one of the sort of moves of these new restaurants was to stay open late and serve this sort of British pub crowd coming out after the pubs were closing down and people were drunk and hungry. And in the early days, they were serving a more traditional chicken tikka, kind of a dry rub style. But drunk British people showed up and said, "Oh, why isn't this covered in gravy?" And some ingenious chef. This is lore, but the lore is that some ingenious chef basically took chicken tikka and combined it with a can of Campbell's tomato soup. And chicken tikka masala was born. And this now is the national dish of Britain, and a good example of this kind of crashing of food cultures into each other.
Even the quintessentially Japanese ramen, the noodles originally came from China. And so this is what we just found over and over again. Food is borrowing, it's combining, it's transforming. Even when the circumstances around these culinary collisions are really terrible, and they often are, the result of war or colonization, forced diaspora. What we found is that food has this really amazing way of belonging to the people who make it their own. And then these dishes kind of, they come to exist on their own terms.
I came to feel that the word fusion is not the right metaphor, because the word fusion is the combining of two things into one. But to sort of do a nerdy comparison, I think fission is the right term. Fission is when two things violently crash into each other and multiple new things are created. And I think this is what you see in food over and over again. Things crashing into each other, sometimes in truly terrible ways, but then creating brand new things that go on to exist in their own way. And in the end, you have more than you started with. So, whether you're talking about something like a sourdough library in Belgium that has collected 130 different sourdoughs from all over the world, each fed with its own original flour type and kept alive in this kind of microbial zoo, or something like this.
This pecan pie vending machine that dispenses whole pecan pies that are baked fresh every day and restocked at midnight.
You'll know it because you'll drive by an enormous squirrel. Or this, eating ice cream topped with Zanzibar spices at this little island restaurant in Tanzania. The idea behind Atlas Obscura and Gastro Obscura is that wonder can be found wherever you are open to searching for it. And we believe that it is sitting right in front of you, waiting to be eaten. So we hope that you dig in. Thank you for joining us on this world tour of Gastro Obscura. I want to say one of the things that we came to again and again in this book are these techniques of preservation, techniques of fermentation, and of pickling, of things like this. And when I thought about doing this presentation in Wisconsin, and I was thinking about who do I want to bring, and I thought about beer, and I thought about cheese, and I thought about fermentation more generally, I thought I want to bring Michael Harlan Turkell to this party. Michael does a lot of things. Michael started out in the restaurant industry proper. Cecily and I are just showing, we're like just nerds, nerding out about food stuff. We're like, oh, let's try this, what's that? Michael started in like the real legit food industry, and then decided to sort of move into the more journalistic side of things. He's the author of a book called Acid Trip that goes all around the world and basically tells you the story of vinegar. Basically, that's the one. All sort of vinegar, how it's made. I mean, this has some of those monastic kind of food traditions, like right in there. And you also host the pizza podcast. What's the full name of it?
It's called the Modernist Pizza Podcast, just launched a week or two ago.
That's right, the Modernist Pizza Podcast, which focuses on presumably the history and future of pizza.
The art, history, and science. It's in conjunction with a 1,700-page book that just came out about pizza.
Yes, he wrote a book on offal, like organs. You've written about beer. You wrote a whole book about beer, the beer pantry. So Michael Harlan Turkell felt like the right person for this Boswell event, and just an exciting person to talk to about food. So I will start by asking you. I mean, I kind of sort of said the story, but like more depth. How did you get into this world?
I cooked from a young age. I went to college and dropped out to continue my culinary career. And while I was cooking, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do and took photography as an elective. The only time I had to photograph was while I was in the kitchen. And for about three and a half years, the camera was a better key into fine dining than my culinary skills. So it almost felt like a ruse that all these white tablecloth places in Boston were letting me into their kitchens to witness the back of the house. So I used it as my educational foundation for what I knew as food. Little did I think I'd ever be a food photographer, which I hate calling myself that. I'm a photographer first. Food just happens to be the majority of what I photograph. But in documenting this, I realized that, like you're saying in regards to Atlas and Gastro, is that I was finding this wonderment wherever I went. So I just documented it for myself for a while until I moved to New York to open a restaurant that never opened, had my oh shit moments. I had knives. I traded those in for a camera. Luckily, Edible magazine had just started and I jumped on board there. And I was their first photographer and photo editor for Brooklyn and Manhattan. I was Eater's first photographer. Food media isn't like what it is today. I mean, no media was like it is today. So I was one of very few people, I think, that got to see this unseen world of chefs and restaurants and kitchens that is very, very transparent today. So in that, I also had my, fascinations about specific foods. Pizza has always been a thread in my life. I worked at a pizzeria in high school. But more specifically, vinegar was purely by happenstance, almost like how I became a photographer. I mean, it was the only elective that fit in my curriculum. My wife is a wine writer, so we always have wine at the house, bottles out and open. And I left one out. And I went a step further and had a party. We didn't drink all the beer. I put it in the barrel in the backyard, as all Brooklynites have barrels in their backyard. And beards and funny glasses and tattoos and skinny jeans. I just have skinny legs, not skinny jeans. And that turned into the greatest malt vinegar I'd ever tasted. And then I took 2 years dissecting how that happened. When I worked in kitchens, I initially worked in places that did, I hate the term.
Wait, hang on, I want to go back one step. Okay, we're going to skip the part about the barrel. Definitely, just for records, very few people have a backyard with which to host a barrel, and even fewer have a barrel.
It's a very small. I'm sitting next to the barrel. It's in
the Venn diagram of this is like very minimal. Anyway, so you poured the beer in the barrel, and then you let it sit there, and then you later were like, you tasted it and were like, wait a second, this is an amazing malt vinegar.
I forgot about it because it had overwintered. We used to have a pizza party the Saturday after Thanksgiving every year, and we just didn't kick the keg. And I poured it in, and it overwintered. And in the spring, I opened it up, and I went, "Holy shit! I want fish and chips right now." And I tasted it. I'm terrible because sometimes I'll just be like, "Oh," and I'm like, "Oh, this could be very caustic." It was the most beautiful acidic, but had some underlying sweetness, that residual sugar, and it was smooth, but the depth that it had was unlike any vinegar I had ever had in my life. And I said, how do I do this again? And I mean, how did I do this in the first place? And I really worked backwards, learning about vinegar, and spent about 2.5 years reading all the things I could about vinegar, experimenting at the house, much to my wife's chagrin. Again, she's a wine writer, so it was like the antithesis to everything that she loved. I had over 500 bottles of vinegar at the house, and she was worried that it was invading and possibly inoculating her wine.
Spoiling her good wines. Yeah.
But is non-interventionist. I mean, it just happened, and I wondered why it happened, and then wondered why it was such an underutilized and maybe uncelebrated pantry ingredient that we all have. That's feels like a second ruse, that I got to write a book where I traveled the world for 18 months learning how to make vinegar, how to cook with it in cultural contexts throughout Europe, Japan, and North America, and really see it in its place. And it was really fascinating journey.
Cool.
Amazing. What is the trickiest vinegar to make? What's a vinegar you can't make by accident, or can you kind of stumble upon them all?
Yeah, I mean, there are a whole bunch that have their idiosyncrasies. Tomato vinegar is extremely hard because lycopene is an anticoagulant. So it actually doesn't let the raft or the SCOBY or the mother form as well at first. And once it forms, it starts making it so thick that it suffocates everything underneath, almost like people keep on telling me it's like a helicopter mother. You know, it's because it extends all the way to the edges and nothing can breathe. So you pull out mothers or scobies about this thick from tomato vinegar, which I have truthfully never really successfully made. I've made it a few times and it's always turned to, it smells like shit. It turns into this indol, aroma, and just goes very bad very quickly. So tomato vinegar is hard. A couple other fruits along the nightshade family have similar enzymes that are a little tough to deal with. But you talked about honey so much in your presentation. That's the majority of the kind of vinegar I made in production that I sold to chefs and restaurants and on the shelves, because it was the easiest one to make. The sugar content was right. I diluted honey, maybe 1 part honey, 5 to 7 parts water. The bacteria just kind of found a great place to establish itself once it turned into mead, and it turned into the most beautiful honey vinegar. And it was also economic. I didn't have to use that much honey to make really extraordinary vinegar. So I bought, I think, a 50-pound barrel of honey at one point and started my vinegar business, really not knowing what I was doing, but it was very low overhead to do so. And that took me on this amazing route around the world, exploring more vinegar cultures.
That's awesome. I mean, one thing that was fun in this book is just seeing the ingenuity. You know, some of the dishes actually, I think people most like recoil from, you know, they're like, oh, like fermented shark and it, you know,
Yeah.
but it's all in this interesting, lutefisk. It's all in this interesting process of preservation. And I think a lot of food history plays out exactly like your malt vinegar experiment, which is basically like, whoops-a-doo.
Yeah.
We forgot about it, or we like accidentally mixed things that weren't meant to be mixed. And I kind of love that. I love both the ingenuity, the brilliance, and the constantly sort of like accidental discovery of food. And I'm curious about sort of, your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, I always tell people that the history of vinegar is parallel to that of beer, wine, any fermentable potable liquid, but it really isn't parallel. It's, a step after, because after wine, it turns into vinegar. And it really started potentially in Babylonia, 5,000 years ago along the Tigris River and Euphrates. I mean, there was all this gorgeous ripe fruit that they were picking and starting to make wines, but they would make the wines in these cellars. The Romans later called them cellas de frutaria. But if you've ever been in a basement during the summer in Egypt, not that I have, I'm sure that it is pretty warm down there. So that wine wasn't wine for long before it converted into vinegar. And then you start seeing instances of vinegar referenced in embalming fluids, in tomes. And, what's so interesting is that it doesn't turn into a culinary ingredient until thousands of years later. And once it does, probably in China about 3,000 years ago, it was a sauce. It was a dunking sauce for noodles. It was not even a sauce. It was a potable that they put a little bit and dilute it with water. But it really didn't become a pantry ingredient until, 3,000 years after it was initially made. And then it took that many more years, probably only in the last 500 years that we've really embraced it as a culinary ingredient. It was more caustic than anything. There's stories about soldiers using it in wars as a styptic agent in the field to stop bleeding. We use glacial vinegar at 97% in sterile environments to do surgery. So what we actually imbibe as culinary vinegar is just 4 to 7% acetic acid in an aqueous solution, which is water. That's a very low acid, but it feels very powerful. I mean, if you've ever tried to take a slug of vinegar, you're going to cough and wheeze, but it is pretty weak relative to what vinegar can be.
That's really interesting.
I mean, do you want me to take a sip of vinegar right now? I brought this out of my fridge. I happily will. This is the vinegar that started it all. When I was a cook, a chef of mine gave me a sip of, this is Gegenbauer PX Noble Sour. PX is Pedro Jimenez. Yeah, this is Pedro Jimenez are the grapes that you find in south of Spain when they make, why can't I remember the fortified wine's name right now? See, that's why my wife's the wine writer. The vinegar maker is from Vienna, Austria, and started making this for himself because he didn't want to drink schnapps with all his friends and get schnookered all the time. So back to everyone getting drunk off of food cultures. So this is, I think, 3.2% acid drinking vinegar, and it's delicious. It's got residual sugar, has this like round taste to it. Someone said Gegenbauer Essig, which is the house vinegar that he makes, which is ostensibly his white distilled vinegar. But I took a shot of this and it was the most profound like flavor experience, textural mouth experience I had ever had. And I take a shot of it a couple times a year just to remind myself of that. So I haven't done it this year. So this is for you. And it's delicious. And the most amazing thing, it really is. The most amazing thing about vinegar is it really doesn't change. It's not necessarily at its finality, but it is, it's vinegar. I mean, what's it going to turn afterwards? You do have to keep certain vinegars in the fridge. I keep this, next to all my condiments. The way it makes you salivate too, the way it opens up your flavor receptors, it's still wild. So if I start drooling, it's because I just took a shot of this.
Cecily, I feel like we need to go and run and get our miracle berries. And
I'm bummed.
Michael, where he's living, like I do want to say we're running close to the end, so I want to give people a chance to ask questions in the chat. If they have questions for Cecily or I or Michael, now would be the time to ask them, or we're just gonna start eating weird foods that we have. Where do we get miracle berries? You can order them in a couple of different forms online. We also are currently touring. We made a vending machine, a Gastro Obscura vending machine, which we call the world's most unusual vending machine. And it, along with many other things, including Mamba, this like spicy Haitian peanut butter, and this incredible Palestinian black tahini Nigella paste, all kinds of amazing stuff in here. But there are also miracle berries that can be purchased from there. Right now it's in Portland. So I'm guessing because this is Boswell's event, you guys are probably not in Portland, but you can order it online. That's where Cecily and I got the miracle berries in our pantries currently. And you can get them freeze dried, which I like because those are the real berries. Like they're actually the berry, or you get them in tablet form, which are they're good. They work. They're very powerful, but it's not as sort of connected to the food itself. What about foods that are poison when raw and great when cooked? How did those come to be? Well, I mean, not to come back to it, but I do often. I mean, I question this about lutefisk all the time because, like, truly, like it really is the process of that food. I don't understand. There's some theories about it being like the ash from wood from fires in water making a kind of accidental lye solution, and then fish being kind of like dried fish sort of getting accidentally put in there or purposely put in there to rehydrate and then washed out. But I think, I don't know, Michael, you might have thoughts on this, but like humans, especially with food, almost more than anything, are like trying there's just a kind of endless little recombination and tinkering. I don't know. I like, yeah.
I thought you were going to say that people are daredevils because they really are. I mean, who was the first person to eat a lutka fish? And actually, lutka fish has vinegar involved in it, and I just threw away the bottle. Otherwise, I would have given it to you. But it's this vinegar called Attica, and it is 24% acidity, which is illegal in the States, which I found out actually was very illegal in the States. And I had posted a picture of it and then had to take it down. And I threw it out because I was so scared I was going to be raided by the vinegar police.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've read that before too about this base alkaline solution that the fish was in, and then they had to wash it off with Attica or a high glacial vinegar to make sure that it wasn't toxic to eat afterwards.
Yeah. I think the combination of those two things, like endless trial and error and a certain lack of care for your people's lives, is the answer to how this happens.
And I think a lot of people got sick.
Yes.
You know, I think we have a lot of
100%.
people before us to thank for trying these things for us.
And I feel like people like they do a little nibble. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You do a little nibble. Yeah.
There's a great vinegar story about it's called Four Thieves vinegar, and it's based in Marseille. And it's this vinegar that had a whole bunch of herbs in it, and it was supposed to be the cure-all for the bubonic plague. It didn't work, but it's delicious. If you've ever had it bouillabaisse before, usually you deglaze your pan with it. But there's also this idea that there are these cure-alls in the food world for poisonous things or for endemic things, and it doesn't always work.
Yeah. Also, you know, like around the world, we all, including Americans in our diet, eat things that are like slightly poisonous to us on a regular basis, like a little bit, you know, like we're all living on the edge. You know what I mean? It's like, what was the scariest, most risky food you've tried? Well, Michael, I'm going to go with you first.
I mean, I did write an awful book. And the thing is, I don't find organ meat scary.
No, I think it's good. I like a lot of that stuff.
I find chicken breast scarier than organ meat because I've been in factories and I've seen how some of those can be produced. And I am saying the word produced. I don't find anything scary because if you debase the idea of what it is, not that you should, I mean, it's flavor and its texture. So even in your book, you have this amazing Polish blood soup, and I had never had blood soups before, the Cezina, which has a little bit of vinegar at the end to kind of open it up. But I've had blood in a lot of different forms, Hong Kong style blood cubes. You know, in the Philippines, there's also those coagulated
sort of
blood.
Jelly style blood. That's like the kind of blood tofu style. Yeah.
But then for anyone who's ever tried uni before and finds it a delicacy, you taste that iron, and you taste that same iron when you taste blood. And I think it's ingenious, blood sausages, etc. Morcilla in Spanish culture. So I don't find anything scary anymore. Risky is capsaicin. You know, I've had really high levels of chilies that may have made me hallucinate before.
Scary is the wrong word for this, but I did another tongue drug the other day. So it wasn't miracle berries, which are mostly just delightful. But I did something called Himena sylvestra, which is another herb. You mostly get it in like pill form from the kind of holistic like foods place. But if you put it on your tongue, it's bitter. It strips your taste buds of the sense of sweetness. And so then I tried a bunch of different stuff. I tried some honey, I tried some ginger ale, I tried a little beer, and it was just kind of a nightmare because it made everything terrible. It made everything taste sort of like a soulless, hollow version of itself. Like it was interesting because you could get some of the flavor, like tried like maple syrup, and you could taste that kind of almost root beer kind of flavor that's in there. But then nothing else. And it was just sort of like a gooey mouth feel, like, yeah. And that was a really weird experience.
That's not good, man, because you need that for your defense systems. The flavor profile bitter was really so people didn't eat certain bitter things which were toxic. So I mean, talk about scary. Sometimes you do have to watch out for flavor profiles because they're their own defense systems.
Yeah.
I think scary is the right word there.
Yeah.
A world without sugar and danger.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
I thought you were pitching your next novel. That was a great world without sugar and danger. I could hear the movie guy's voice.
That could be next.
Are we going to gloss over the cannibalistic chef thing?
Yeah, but I will say there is something in the book. Here's how far this is as much as I'll go into this. If you go to the Yukon in Canada, you can go drink the sour toe cocktail, which is a mummified human toe. Well, it's in alcohol, so it's a sort of pickled human toe. And the rules are you can drink it fast or you can drink it slow, but the lips have got to touch the toe. And it can be whatever drink you want. It can be water, but you sip it, your lips touch the toe, they put it back in its bottle, and you join the Sour Toe Cocktail Club, of which there are many tens of thousands of members now. I mean, the other irony of this is actually they're on like their 11th toe because there were a handful of people. The first guy just got wasted, fell over, and accidentally swallowed the toe. But later on, there was someone else who came in, ordered it, did a shot, ate the toe, slammed down $500, which was the fine at the time. They've raised it since, and basically walked out of the bar. So, it's not unheard of, but no, the answer to that question is
what the scariest thing about that is? If you were drinking so much that you swallowed a toe and then you passed the toe the next day, like looking in the toilet and seeing a toe floating in there and forgetting what you've done.
It's not good thing.
We didn't follow up with that.
Yeah.
What happened afterwards?
Yeah, we know. Who knows? Who knows? Those people were never the same. Well, we're at 9:06, so I think unless there are any like urgent burning questions on people's minds, I would encourage people, obviously, to check out Gastro Obscura. It has all of these stories and many, many more. And it was a real joy for Cecily and I to work on this book, and we're happy to share it with you. And check out Michael's Acid Trip, as well as other books, Beer Pantry, and he's up to really great, interesting stuff. Oh, someone just finished Diamond Head today.
Thanks, Chris.
Cecily's an incredible novelist, as well as being an amazing nonfiction writer as well. So thank you all for joining us tonight. We'll see you another time, hopefully next time in person again. I always love hanging out at Boswell's events. They're super fun.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. So thank you both for coming. Thanks to everyone who joined us virtually. We would have a book.
Thanks, Daniel. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, everyone.
Have a good night.